All right, everybody, this is Mark Sims again. Just a few questions. I asked just a few questions, and I have my buddy Benny J on the line. Benny J, it sounds better now, right?
Yes, it does.
Because I have to apologize. Last time I had you on, Ben, it was so bad. It was a good interview, but you were great, but the sound was terrible. So, but this time, I want to talk.
There was a vacuum cleaner.
No, it was. You know what? It's a long story.
Okay.
Your bonus
so
shows,
anyway.
your podcast is absolutely excellent with Dennis. It's great. Then you have these bonus shows on the weekend, which are great. Promote the bonus shows for people. I really want people to really click the link at the bottom of this video and listen to some of Ben's bonus shows. And you can listen to the regular show too. But what are your bonus shows about?
Well, it could be about anything. So we do the show live Tuesdays through Fridays from 1 to 3:15, and then it just seems as though there was this big vacancy, this hole on the weekend when we weren't posting anything. And so Dennis and I had this idea, why don't we just do separate interviews? And they've taken on a life of their own. So I view it as an opportunity to take a deeper dive with a guest. We can go, sometimes we go long. I mean, an hour to hour 20, sometimes as little as 45, 45 minutes.
I'm sorry, I didn't want to cut in, but that Henry Davis interview, he was discussing Pete Buttigieg. That went like an hour.
Yeah. Henry Davis Jr., we've had him on twice now. He's a councilman from South Bend, Indiana. Yeah. And that went over an hour. He's very critical of Pete Buttigieg, the Mayor Pete of South Bend. I urge everybody to check it out if you want another. Mayor Pete. Henry Davis is, that's exactly that's a great example. So you just take a deeper dive with someone, and he was explaining what life is like in South Bend. And, I mean, I have to admit, Mark, I didn't know anything about South Bend. And, you know how there's another side of the tracks in a town?
Yeah, I live on the other side of the tracks. Done it all my life.
He was talking about the other side of the tracks in South Bend, and I thought it was fascinating. So that's a perfect example.
Yeah, I had a favorable impression of Pete Buttigieg, Mayor Pete, until I heard him about how he views African Americans, and I was done with Mayor Pete.
Yeah, and I'll say it's just one man's opinion, but it's shared by a lot of people in South Bend apparently, and it helps explains why Mayor Pete has such abysmal support in the black community. And I don't understand, again, I've said this so many times, how any Democrat thinks he or she's going to win the nomination without black support. So,
I'm sorry. Yeah, let me do Mayor Pete one more time. Demery Koppel has been on your bonus shows, which is good. Demery Koppel, political strategist par excellence. She was excellent. She talked about, you can tell the listeners about Pete Buttigieg being on 47th Street in the hood.
Yes, that's right. We talked a lot about that. Pete Buttigieg wanted to have a rally in Chicago, and he wanted to unveil his Douglas plan, which is a plan intended to help African Americans. So he was going to have it in Chicago at the Harold Washington Cultural Center, which is at 47th and King in Bronzeville. So he had it on, I forget what night it was. The point is, almost everybody in the audience was white, and the outreach, it just demonstrated the lack of outreach between the Buttigieg campaign and black community. And Demery Koppel was commenting on it. Sergio Mims. So many of our guests commented on it because, it just, in some ways, it shows a cluelessness on the part of the Buttigieg campaign, and it was pretty embarrassing. So, listen, our city is segregated. We talked about that the last time. Our city is very segregated, and in some ways, that was indicative of how segregated our city is.
You mentioned Sergio. You mentioned Sergio Mims, and there's a podcast I'm not going to listen to, but I encourage other people to listen to because you talked about movies with Sergio Mims, and don't talk about what's it, America? What's the old boys movie you talked about?
Oh, Quentin Tarantino.
Don't mention anything about the movie, but talk about the podcast.
That is one of my favorites, and that's a classic bonus. So I urge everyone if you've seen Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the newest Tarantino movie, and if you're a fan of that movie, to check out this bonus feature. It's Sergio Mims. Sergio Mims probably knows more about movies than anyone I've ever met. The man, he runs the Black Carpet Film Festival. He's one of the founders of the Black Carpet Film Festival, and his knowledge of movies is so vast. It's like an encyclopedia, Mark. And so I brought him, Chris Buddy, who's a documentary filmmaker and is a very talented movie maker, and Chris Adams, who you should have him on your show. Chris Adams is a movie maker who specializes in sci-fi horror movies, and he lives on the south side of Chicago. So he's a Chicago filmmaker and really smart guy too. And I brought him in to discuss Tarantino's movie, and we started off by saying, if you haven't seen the movie, don't listen to this podcast because we're doing spoiler alerts. But by now, everybody who I think has seen the movie, most people who intend to see the movie have seen the movie, I guess. So check it out, and you should hurry up and see it. I'd love to get your opinion, Mark. It took you a while to see Django, and then you liked it.
No. I don't. I'm weird. There was another Laurie Glenn. I don't know who Laurie Glenn is, but she was I think she was a recent podcast, another bonus recently. But tell people about Laurie Glenn. She's been on two bonus
Laurie
shows.
Glenn is she's a strategist in the city, a political strategist and publicist in the city of Chicago for years, and mostly she is behind the scenes. But now more and more she says, the heck with it, I'm going to speak my mind. She's been on twice as a bonus. I'll tell you the second time she was just on, I wrote a column in the Reader that was critical of Lori Lightfoot's budget speech. And Laurie Glenn contacted me and said, I'm being unfair to Lori Lightfoot. I said, well, come on the show and say it. And so next thing you know, I booked Laurie Glenn and Juanita Irizarry, who are both more, what's the word? They have, they're more complimentary of Lori Lightfoot's position, I guess you could say. They're more positive about it, I guess that's the way of saying it. So they came on and defended Lori Lightfoot and her budget speech. That was yesterday. And before that, I had Laurie Glenn on talking about, we were talking about how Donald Trump is trying to wedge Jews away from the Democratic Party and his strategy for doing that, which if he's going to win re-election, he's going to have to be successful in Florida and Pennsylvania. It's part of his overall re-election strategy, that and suppressing the black vote. Those are two key aspects of it. So we talked about that with Laurie. She's pretty smart. She knows her stuff. And I'm glad that she's finally she's finally just saying, out of heck with it, I'm going to go public. And that's what you do in a bonus. You can sit down and talk with someone for a while and get to know Demery Koppel's another one. Demery Koppel's probably the smartest political strategist in the city, in my humble opinion, or right up there. And so I love sitting down talking politics with Demery.
Well, I encourage everyone to look on the bottom of this podcast, this video podcast, and listen to Ben's show, his regular show, and the podcast. And even if you're not a big you don't like politics too much, listen, you're going to love it. Trust me. Right, Ben?
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better myself.
It's just absolutely, you stop. I don't listen to NPR as much because of you, Ben. You know that.
Well, sorry, NPR.
All right. Benny J, thanks for being on the podcast. And hopefully you'll come back soon, please, Ben.
Will do. Talk to you soon, Mark.